Welcome to Stop Overthinking, the podcast for overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists who want to feel calm and confident enough to handle whatever life sends your way. I'm your host, Kristen, a women's life and mindset coach, lifelong educator, and recovering perfectionist. Welcome back to the Stop Overthinking podcast. This is the 1-year anniversary episode. Exactly 1 year ago today, I launched this podcast. So 50 episodes later, here we are. Today, I am going to be talking about our capacity to feel frustration and to tolerate certain emotions, but I'm going to focus on the frustration aspect. And here's where this came from. Recently, I had a conversation about failure tolerance and frustration tolerance, and if my tendencies towards perfection and a low tolerance for frustration is impacting my kids. Ouch. So, background, both my kids and I have dealt with anxiety at various levels throughout our lives. All of us have been in therapy at least at some point, even if it's right now. I have one child in therapy, and the kids therapist was talking to me about the low frustration tolerance and how it was increasing anxiety for this child. And frustration tolerance is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's our capacity to tolerate frustration. And it's a skill that, of course, is going to vary from person to person, and even different aspects of your life may have different frustration tolerance levels. But with a low tolerance, essentially, we are quick to feel frustrated and feel it really intensely. So this can amp up to anger and perhaps even intense anger, or it may simply lead to give up. It's essentially the opposite of a growth mindset that you've probably heard about. And with that low tolerance, there's a lack of curiosity, a lack of positivity. With frustration intolerance, it's basically like when things start going awry, you are feeling the annoyance or anger bubbling up inside you. You maybe even begin to feel the tension in your body or an urge to yell or cry or throw your hands up. And you may even recognize your reaction is exaggerated or even illogical, but you don't know how to stop it. And this could look like feeling easily irritated or getting angry, giving up on those tasks, lashing out at people who are close to you, maybe procrastination because of your inability to endure those tedious or difficult things. You might have exaggerated reactions to inconvenience or discomfort, and this can impact your relationships due to lashing out, and it can also look like impatience and restlessness. And again, this does not have to be the same way in all parts of your life. So this discussion with the kids therapist went on about how I deal with frustration at home and how I'm modeling it for this child. And I thought, oh, I do this really well, right? I teach this, I talk about it all the time. Then I sat with it for a moment and I'm like, no, I can see where this could be problematic. And it's, my internal thinking, right? It's part of that is my desire in my life that I want to be perceived as competent. And this has led me to deal with imposter syndrome or feeling like I'm wearing a mask. It is a lack of vulnerability or willingness to show vulnerability at certain points in my life. I tend to be pretty risk adverse in a lot of things. And whether that be financially or just taking more risk in my life. And I have lots of justifications for that, right? Like, oh, I'm a single parent, I can't take these things on. But let's be real, it happened way before I became a single parent. I am the thinker, the overthinker, right? The researcher, the one who's really calculated. I am not a spontaneous person. My kids know that. Like if pickup times from the weekend sleepover aren't planned ahead of time, I get irritated because it's going against the flow of my day, right? Okay, so yeah, there's times that I have this low frustration tolerance that I think that I have dealt with or that I am giving this perception of competence to my kids, and maybe they're seeing that, but they're still not seeing frustration and failure. And it's harder for them to deal with without having a reference point on what to do with that. And the reason all of this becomes a problem for us individually, or in this case for my kid, is because each time that we just give up in the face of frustration, we are strengthening our tendency to give up, right? It just keeps creating a mind loop that we continue doing what we have been doing. And all too often, withdrawing in the face of frustration will just reinforce a weakened sense of self. It reinforces this internal chatter that we are inadequate. So you can see how this topic hits a bunch of things that we regularly talk about on our podcast. So as I was thinking more about this, and of course, then I'm doing some research and having conversations with my coach, and I, kind of went down a rabbit hole in terms of this topic. And I'm like, I haven't really talked about this. So here we go. Where does this come from? Of course, like a lot of things in our life, childhood is going to have a big impact on your ability to tolerate frustration or failure. It a lot of times will come from that early support or encouragement that you got or didn't get when you were facing challenges. So, for example, the child who is building with blocks or Legos or whatever, and it falls down. How the reaction to that was there support, was there encouragement, try it again. And for the child who got that and then would try again. And there's going to be the other child who sulks and gives up and does something else. And depending on how the parent reacted to that, you have a predisposition towards one or the other. It also comes about in problem solving skills. This happens again from childhood, but all the way up to the present day. All too often, we expect ourselves to have certain skills, even though we never had formal training or instruction on learning them. And I would see this when I was teaching, for example, that we expected kids to learn how to study. And there wasn't necessarily a formal education on how to study. That may have changed in some places, but we just expect that. And then kids are like, oh, I'm supposed to study, and they don't really know how. We may see this in parenting, right? Just because you have grown up and you had parents or guardians of some sort does not mean that you know how to parent. It requires additional skills, either from asking people or talking to experts or reading a book or getting some guidance in some way. I hear a lot about this in the workplace, that we have administrators or managers that are promoted people skills or even the managerial skills to handle that job. But there is just this expectation of having these skills. So, how you learn how to problem solve, how you learn how to do with that is also going to impact your overall frustration tolerance. Okay. Anger does come into this because frustration's linked to it. So it also takes a look at kind of how do you deal with anger? If you have a difficulty letting go of anger about things in the past, and we know that that contributes to overthinking and rumination, it also contributes to a negative self talk and keeps you stuck in the past. So that is also linked closely to your level of frustration tolerance. So, the good news is that having this low tolerance for frustration is not a permanent character flaw. It just is the absence of a skill that would allow us to more effectively sit with strong negative emotions and the lack of self awareness, and then having some of these distorted thinking processes. So it's a challenge that can be addressed by developing our self awareness, by increasing self compassion and mindfulness, and then also having some patience and commitment to be able to deal with the emotional aspect of this. Right? So again, so much of what we talk about in general comes back to this. And for me, it's this willingness to feel some sort of discomfort, whether that's frustration or disappointment. And even bigger than that, if other people are going to see this, is vulnerability. And then whether or not your fear of shame or humiliation, if you are not being perceived the way you want to be perceived in front of others. So, where are you on this frustration tolerance spectrum? There are going to be places in your life where you likely handle this really well. And there are probably going to be some places that you could improve this. But we know that talking about emotions or talking about shame or failure, whether that's in your personal life or your professional life, is not all that common. So, one of these things is to bring it out in the open. And I'm talking about it right here. In the spirit of this podcast, I'm even doing this less scripted than I usually do. Again, it's that perception of competency that I like to put forward and having everything organized. And I was like, no, I want to talk more from the heart from this. And so it is not necessarily going to flow the way I maybe would have chosen to if I had written this all out ahead of time. But it was like, I need to push myself a little bit here when I am putting these words out into the world for thousands of people to listen to. And I can push this boundary just a little bit, feel a little bit uncomfortable, and know that it's still going to be okay. So, how do we work on our frustration tolerance? There are some action based ones. So, I know some of you are really focused more on the action based things, and I'm going to talk about the emotional component after this. So, you can talk about it, and it can be with somebody that you trust when you are feeling, less than competent or feeling frustrated. Talk about it with someone you trust. Another way to deal with this is when you are feeling resistant to trying something again, or maybe trying something for the first time, is think about it as an experiment. Right? As we experiment, we know that there's going to be trials and errors, and sometimes we have to tweak something in order to do it again to get a different result. And so you are thinking of it more of as an experiment versus one and done. You can celebrate your wins, whatever that is, even if it's something completely unrelated to the issue that you're dealing with. You can do something else that you enjoy. So if you're feeling that frustration, you're feeling like a failure, you're getting into the negative self-talk, all of the things that spiral from this, take a break and go do something that you really enjoy. Journaling. I'm always going to talk about journaling. Get those feelings out. Maybe you're not going to talk to somebody else, but it's okay to just get it down and out of your head. And another part of writing that down is maybe add a couple of things that went well in addition to the negative so that you're not focused on the negative, because we know that more than one thing can be true at the same time. So although there maybe was something that didn't go well, or there's something that's negative, there's something you're frustrated about, very likely there's another piece that also went okay, or at least better. So just opening up that perspective to not focus only on the negative. You can do some deep breathing to work through the emotions. Just close your eyes and take a couple of deep breaths. And you can always ask for help for somebody that does know what they're doing and can help you get there faster. And this emotional part, like I talked about, for me, I know that some of this is not wanting to have those so called negative experiences. But we need to remember that all emotions have value. And developing a broader emotional tolerance or a broader frustration tolerance requires us to think differently about the feelings than we probably have before. So we learn to accept these feelings without judgment. And instead of labeling things as good or bad or that I was right or wrong, it's like a data point, right? We're just seeing this as information. We have this whole ability to feel this range of motions. So some are going to maybe feel physiologically more comfortable and pleasant. It's also important to remember that feelings are just part of being human. Another way to increase that frustration tolerance is to accurately identify your feelings. And I've talked about this, I have it on the blog, I've done other podcasts, but labeling your feelings accurately is scientifically proven to reduce the intensity of that emotion. So, one, you need to be able to label it accurately. And this can be harder if you were raised in a family or a culture where anger or sadness was discouraged, or that you were given messages earlier in life to suck it up and, don't cry about it, whatever. Accurately identifying your feelings, you're going to be somewhere on that spectrum to be able to say, well, of course I'm frustrated. I haven't done this before. Or of course I'm frustrated because I'm still learning how to do this thing. And giving yourself permission to experience that feeling is one step. So that's labeling it, but then you also have to be able to sit with your feelings. And this is where so many people struggle. And I get it, but we know that emotions naturally rise and fall and they're going to shift throughout the day. And processing your feeling, we've talked about this before, it takes about 90 seconds for it to go through. Where is it in your body? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it hard? Is it soft? Does it move? Does it have a color? And you just focus on where it is in your body, not the thoughts, but focusing on where it is in your body. And, it's stuck in your shoulders. Can you just breathe through that and take a breath? Does it lessen? Is it shifting? And it's going to move. And very few people were ever taught this skill, right? So we're talking about it and something that you need to do, but sit with those feelings. And that is going to allow you to feel frustration. What does frustration feel like in your body? For me, it's like tightness kind of in my chest. I clench my jaw. And then I just notice, where is it? If it's moving, am I feeling it in the same place where I've noticed it before? And the point of doing this is to let it process through your body, but also, I've done this before. I know what frustration feels like. I can handle it. And then I can move on. And I can also do some of those other action things. So, having an ability to work through frustration, having an ability to work through your emotions is going to allow you to have this bigger spectrum. And I'm talking about this, I'm putting it out here in the world. This is something I'm still working on in different places because a lot of times I don't like feeling frustrated. Intellectually, I know that I can get through it, all that stuff that I just talked about. But I also am seeing it from a parenting perspective in this case, or maybe from a professional standpoint that you have people underneath you. And do you have a tolerance for frustration that is very low with others? Do people feel free and safe to be able to try things? And you might need to model that better, whether that's in your work life or your professional life as well. So, viewing things as an experiment, willing to try again. And even if it goes poorly and you get angry, to not get stuck in the past that I can't do this, I've tried it before, it's not going to work. And to be able to set up and know that I am learning how to do this. I'm learning to work through my frustration. And I can do it differently than what has been done in the past. So I hope that this was helpful for you today, gave you some things to think about, and maybe have a conversation with somebody to just start recognizing where in your life you have great frustration tolerance and learn from that. Why do you feel really strongly in these certain areas in your life? And how can you bring it into other places where you would like to improve? So, thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this group and supporting the Stop Overthinking podcast for the past year. I have some exciting things planned for this next year. I have been reaching out and finding some more guests that are in alignment with this message. Of course, I have things to say, but sometimes I think it's really helpful to bring in other perspectives and I love being able to collaborate with other people who have different experiences and maybe can offer something different than what I do. So we have some topics coming up this next season, from body and your skin and male and female energy and positive intelligence and imposter syndrome. I have other people that I'm still working and setting those up. And again, there's going to continue to be solo episodes just like this one. So have a great week, and I will talk to you again soon. Thank you for listening to the Stop Overthinking podcast with Kristen. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who would benefit from the message. To learn more about working with me and links to social media and free resources, head over to my website, coachwithkristen.com. That's Kristen spelled Kristen. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Have a great week.